This is a weird one to do because I've been seeing a lot of these posts on stuff like Facebook and those meme pages on Facebook and Reddit and stuff like that, because people seem to be, particular movie fans seem to dislike Interstellar, which I guess is fair enough. It's weird that I find it interesting that people just like it. I mean, outside of the fact that it's like a 2.5 hour space epic and whatever. So there is that obvious thing of someone might not like the genre, that kind of deal. But this is more or less people actually watching it and then being like, what I don't like is this one particular aspect of the film. And from what I've mostly seen, it's the fact that people don't like the love transcends space and time deal, which I guess is fair enough. You do you. I like it. I'm fine with it. I love the film. I think it's an amazing film. I guess that's going to warrant instant dislikes from people who don't like the film, but that's just how it goes. My opinion's my opinion. I'm not gonna tell you that, oh, well, screw you because you think that love is bullshit or whatever the hell. However, I would like to discuss and more or less just kind of meditate on, if you will, the differences between 2001: A Space Odyssey, Tarkovsky's Stalker, and of course, Interstellar. So let's get into it. Fully record, I have seen all of these films, otherwise why would I have an opinion on it? That doesn't make any sense. Firstly, we of course have 2001: A Space Odyssey, it's the 4K, it's beautiful. Then we have Tarkovsky's Stalker, the Criterion version, which is also an incredible film. And we have Interstellar on 4K. Which one would I say is my favorite of the three? I'd probably say Interstellar. As a personal bias, it is definitely my favorite of the three. It's my more rewatchable film. I think 2001 has excellent craft in terms of filmmaking and probably is the best crafted film, but at the same time, they're also unique for their time periods and for what they aim to achieve. I think Stalker probably because it maybe had arguably a lesser budget than the other two, but let's not really get into that aspect of it. More or less how it displays its use of budget. It does scenes that are not as exceptional looking as, say, Interstellar or 2001, but at the same time, it's less about sometimes the look of what you can get with high production budget and stuff like that, and more of what you can achieve without that, and just letting kind of the camera take hold of just being in these immaculate environments that are so unique yet daunting and really quite horrifying and bleak. But of course, that's more or less the setting of the film. Stalker is a beautiful film that goes for 161 minutes. Yes, all these go for quite a while. For those who don't know, I will actually read out the blurb for you. The blurb. Andrei Tarkovsky's final Soviet feature is a metaphysical journey through an enigmatic post-apocalyptic landscape. A hired guide, the Stalker, leads a writer and a professor into the heart of the Zone, capital Z, the restricted site of a long-ago disaster, where the three men eventually zero in on the Room, a place rumoured to fulfill one's most deeply held desires. Adapting a science fiction novel by Arkady, sure, and Boris Strutsky. Oh man, I'm not good at pronouncing Russian names. Tarkovsky created an immersive world with a wealth of material detail and a sense of organic atmosphere. A religious allegory, a reflection of political anxieties, a meditation on film itself. Stalker envelops the viewer by opening up a multitude of possible meanings. And it definitely is. This film was made released in 1979. A good year for films. It goes for, 161 minutes. It is in Russian with English subtitles. It's a film that sticks with you for a long time, and that's, I think, the perk and joy of many Tarkovsky productions. They definitely have that feel to it that can stay with you. They're very meditative, they're very thought-provoking, and I very much admire that aspect to the film. I think of maybe all of these three films, it has more of that nature to itself, that it is designed to evoke such progressive thought about itself and about film in general, about so many other contextual things. Then, of course, you have 2001: A Space Odyssey, where its blurb is as ridiculous as this. Stanley Kubrick's dazzling Academy Award-winning achievement is a compelling drama of man vs. machine, a stunning meld of music and motion. Kubrick, who co-wrote the screenplay with Arthur C. Clarke, first visits our prehistoric ape ancestry past, then leaps millennia via one of the most mind-blowing jump cuts ever into colonized space, and ultimately whisks astronaut Bauman, Keir Delia, into uncharted space, perhaps even into immortality. Open the pod bay doors, Hal. Let an awesome journey unlike any other begin. Yeah, it's got a really shitty blurb to it. I can't believe they've ruined, unless they just really wanted to sell this and be like, oh, it's just an immaculate journey, you'd be surprised how beautiful it is, because it's, long, and it's 148 minutes, so it's not as long as Stalker. Arguably, I feel like these films have an aspect that you've got to be in a mood for them sometimes. Interstellar probably is the only one that doesn't, and I think that's probably what makes it stand out more, because 2001 and Stalker, because they're long and they're very arduous films to take on, because there's a lot of themes and very much a lot of ideas presented to you that have no real explanation or discussion outside of just minor aspects of, mostly based from interpretation. Unless you read the book or whatever, that being for 2001. And so that's what I think those two films have in such a unique passage. They're very interpretive, they're very explorative of themes and, religion and contextual politics and all these different aspects that make the films unique, as well as their visual presentation, their use of sound and location and everything else. And then there's Interstellar. And I'm starting to see more as to why people would criticize this outside of the, love traverses space and time deal. Let's discuss this film that goes for 169 minutes, so it's actually the longest of the three. From director Christopher Nolan of Inception and the Dark Knight trilogy fame, comes the story of a team of pioneers undertaking the most important mission in human history. Academy Award winner Matthew McConaughey stars as an ex-pilot turned farmer, Cooper, who must leave his family and a foundering Earth behind to lead an expedition traveling beyond this galaxy to discover whether mankind has a future among the stars. Academy Award winner Anne Hathaway and Academy Award nominee Jessica Chastain also star in the landmark film. Lou Lemonick of the New York Post calls one of the most exhilarating film experiences so far this century. Interstellar is a more simply told film in that presence. It's about the connection of one family over time as well as space. In the literal and almost metaphorical sense. But mostly in the literal sense, because it's literally Cooper, the father of two kids, goes to space and goes through a black hole kind of wormhole deal he goes through a wormhole to see if they can find a place to potentially re-inhabit the world. And while he's failing on his mission more or less, his kids are growing up, taking care of the farm, and then doing the science. Or at least Jessica Chastain is, because Ben Affleck's brother doesn't like science. And so, yeah, it's definitely less in terms of the intensity and broadness of ideas and scope that Stalker and 2001 has. And I can understand why people would view those two films and then watch Interstellar and be like, oh, Interstellar's a piece of crap in comparison. And arguably, yes, but you've got to look at different perspectives. See, I think with Interstellar, Christopher Nolan, who obviously, and his brother Jonathan, who wrote the screenplay, obviously wanted to go for some very heavy ideas, but more or less uncomplicated. The only real complication was the science of the idea, less of what the ideas actually present. Arguably, you could look at it like there is a complication between can love actually traverse time and space, but they utilize that within their fictional narrative to actually say, yes, it does, and it saves humanity, because love saves humanity, which is fair enough. It's a good theme, it's a good idea to go with. I'm wholeheartedly for it. I'm not going to can't really criticize it, outside of some minor, probably, delivery. But at the same time, it's a film that also embodies a sense of time and movement through its use of music, through its use of editing and pacing especially, and how it juxtaposes Cooper's present with the future, present, past of his daughter, and almost the complete tragedy that befalls their life because Cooper is sent on this mission that ends up, of course, saving the world. Well, saving the human race, I should say, because they don't really explain if Earth survives, but I don't think that really matters. It's more about, does humanity survive? Whereas something like Stalker is more or less an isolated thing. You're focusing on the Stalker, yes, and you're focusing on the other two characters, the professor and the writer, but it's more or less the journey and how it characterizes the characters. Of course, you learn stuff about the characters on the path of the journey, but it's more or less the how it affects them, what they want, their needs and desires, all this kind of aspects, whilst also kind of commenting on more or less like human nature as a whole. If you're given this whole entire prospect of complete absolution in the eyes of complete decimation and destruction. This being, of course, because it's post-apocalyptic and they're looking for something more uplifting. Hey, let's go to this really terrible, dangerous place where we'll potentially die just so we can potentially make a wish. Yeah, good one. Because humans are stupid. Anyway. And of course, 2001 is this very surreal exploration of more or less the progression of technology and humanity, and how much one has relied on the other. Technology taking all these many forms, from the simple weapon of a bone to the obvious spaceship and AI and stuff like that. It presents a lot of discussion that even to this day can be interpreted and analyzed. Interstellar definitely lacks that aspect, and maybe in a decade or so it'll lose a lot of that flair, because it doesn't really have any of those big ideas outside of but I don't know, I feel like its biggest idea outside of the whole love traverse space and time and the black hole deal with the ending would be more or less how it looks at the connection with humanity, which I think is something that will always persist, but it doesn't have something that's broader, I think. And I think that's also why it's probably earned this kind of, not earned, but just kind of received this criticism from fans of such films like Stalker and anything like 2001, how you could even beg to differ, Solaris and Annihilation as well. So I think with 2001 and Stalker, they obviously have that aspect of their thinking texts, much like reading a philosophy essay. They're thinking texts. Whereas Interstellar is more just, it's just science fiction, and it's a cool science fiction narrative with a message to it and a moral and stuff like that, and this stuff that goes far beyond the thinking of potential reality with the whole fourth dimension thing stuff, or everything that occurs in the black hole. And that's, of course, where it especially excels in its science fiction, outside of just the fact that it's literally people going into space to go into a wormhole. I mean, come on, none of this is meant to be realistic. But at the same time, the other two films are posing themselves as realistic, which I think is, outside of the fact that obviously Interstellar was trying to pose itself as a realistic future that could happen, but not exactly, because it's very much strongly holding on to, this isn't something that might happen, more or less the idea of human destruction and annihilation from ourselves is a possibility that's most likely going to happen. But the aspect of going into space to traverse a wormhole to do this specific kind of deal isn't exactly. It takes the loose ideas space travel, expanding and colonizing other planets, and the inevitable destruction of Earth, and then weaving them into a science fiction narrative that's very focused on the fiction elements through its characterizations and its presentation of ideas. And that's fair enough. I think that's why it's not exactly the thinking film that it probably maybe it wanted to be, but at the same time, it doesn't need to be, because this is also very much sold for general audiences. Big cast, big name director, hey look, space, and cool stuff. And to be fair, I love it. It's a beautiful film. Whereas Stalker and 2001, I feel like are much less for the masses. They're much harder films for regular consumption, and of course, that's probably because they slower in pacing. They invoke a lot of the imagery and ideas, stuff that isn't really discussed or explained or elaborated in the film. It's stuff that you have to interpret yourself, which is also one of the many wonders of films. I mean, I very much admire. I'd even call Stalker very much a meditative film, because it's just so picturesque in its the way the information flows and the way everything is constructed and explored to the audience. And I think that's why the two of 2001 and Stalker are so uniquely distinct from Interstellar, and why you can't categorize them all as the same thing. I mean, as it goes, 2001 is very close to Interstellar in the aspect of, hey, they're both science fiction movies about a possible future. Both of them having very realistic future aspects in multiple different degrees, whereas they both still have their fantasy elements of going into a black hole and suddenly, look, it's got a bedroom. And then, 2001, giant space baby. Not everything is explanatory and realistic. Stalker does have elements like that, but it's more based on this, because it's based on this post-apocalyptic nature, and this post-apocalyptic could be from anything. Nuclear annihilation, most possibly, because it was filmed during the Cold War, and all these other aspects that could kind of subtextually or even contextually build on the film and its overall narrative. And its end result of what the three men experience in the zone, and then when you get back from the zone, your final twist, which I'm not going to say, but that final twist just at his house is just, that's kind of the real only, I feel like that's the most fantasy-like element, because everything else could potentially be real in a kind of post-apocalyptic environment, but at the same time, it's not meant to be disguised as real, it's meant to be metaphorical, which is the point. It's symbolic, it's all interpretive. Which I guess Giant Space Baby is also interpretive, but at the same time, there's an explanation, read the book. So yes, they definitely have their scale, with Stalker being at the far end of very idea-based and metaphorical, with 2001 being, hey, very based and grounded in a kind of reality that could happen, but still ending on this note of metaphor and symbolism, and think about it, interpret it kind of deal. Also, trippy space ant. Woohoo, it's the 60s. And then, of course, you have Interstellar, which is much more grounded in reality, based for the general audiences for mass consumption, and is trying to be optimistic in a very pessimistic environment. And to get the optimism, you have to go through a black hole and find a bedroom. So at the same time, it also, of course, has its fantasy elements. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. If you have your own opinions on if you think that there's a better of the three, or however it be, your interpretations of the pair, the trilogy, then please feel free to discuss down below. This is, of course, just my thoughts and interpretations and feelings on the trilogy of films, that is. What do I prefer to watch more? Interstellar, easy to consume. What do I think is the better film? Probably Stalker. It's much more interpretive and immersive. 2001, of course, is still an exceptional film in terms of how it's made, and just how the hell did they make that film. Anyway, that's all for now. See you in the next video, hopefully. If not, like, share, and subscribe for more, and see you around. I've got other video essays where I can just stand up and interpret and just go on about this forever. So that's a thing I do. Or I write stuff and then read that off scripts. Bye.